Belonging to the church is often understood as identity, a place, a name, a tradition. But in the mystical vision of Saint Faustina, belonging to the church is not first about what you claim, it is about what you allow Jesus to claim in you. And this is where many quietly resist. Let me ask you something honestly. Have you ever felt comfortable belonging to the church, but uncomfortable letting Jesus change you deeply? This tension is not accidental. Saint Faustina's spirituality reveals a Christ who does not seek passive membership. He seeks transformed hearts, not people who merely attend, but souls who allow themselves to be reshaped by mercy, truth, and obedience. To belong to Jesus is not to be associated with him, it is to be formed by him, and that formation is costly. Many people want the comfort of belonging without the discomfort of conversion. They want the protection of identity without the vulnerability of surrender. They want to be counted among God's people, but they quietly resist what that belonging demands. Jesus, in his words to souls like Faustina, does not reduce belonging to external practice. He speaks of interior response, of humility, of trust, of obedience that reaches into the private places of the heart. What he expects is not perfection, it is availability. Saint Faustina's mystical insights show a Jesus who looks not first at performance, but at surrender. He does not ask, "Are you in my church?" He asks, "Have you given me your will?" This is where resistance begins, because giving Jesus your will means allowing him to touch areas you would rather manage yourself, your wounds, your habits, your defenses, your way of controlling outcomes, your need to protect yourself from disappointment. Many belong outwardly, but remain guarded inwardly. They say yes to faith, but no to full surrender. They accept mercy in theory, but resist mercy when it challenges pride. They want Jesus as Savior, but hesitate to receive him as Lord. Saint Faustina would say that Jesus does not force this surrender. He waits for it. He invites. He persists. But he does not override freedom. And this is why many resist, not loudly but quietly. Resistance often looks like comfort, routine, spiritual familiarity, but Jesus expects something deeper. He expects the soul to allow itself to be led, to be corrected, to be softened, to be made poor in spirit, to trust him even when his ways disturb your sense of control. Belonging to his church is not a shield from transformation, it is the doorway into it. And many resist, not because they hate Jesus, but because they fear what surrender will cost. Saint Faustina reveals a Jesus who does not ask for partial hearts. He asks for real ones, wounded ones, resistant ones, but open ones. What he expects is not flawless obedience, it is a willing heart. And that expectation changes everything. One of the most misunderstood expectations Jesus has for those who belong to his church is not external conformity, but interior obedience. Not blind rule-following, not mechanical practice, but a heart that allows itself to be led, even when it does not fully understand. Saint Faustina's mystical life reveals a Jesus who speaks insistently about trustful obedience, not because he desires control, but because he desires freedom for the soul, freedom from self-reliance that quietly becomes a barrier to grace. Many resist this. They want Jesus close, but not directive. They want his comfort, but not his correction. They want his promises, but not his authority. This resistance is subtle. It rarely looks like rebellion, it looks like negotiation. I will follow you here, but not there. I will trust you in this, but not in that. I will surrender what is easy, but protect what feels too costly. Saint Faustina shows that Jesus does not expose these areas to shame the soul. He exposes them to heal it. Because anything the soul refuses to place under his guidance eventually becomes a source of anxiety, fear, or hidden control. Jesus expects the soul to allow him into the places it manages most tightly. This is where resistance intensifies. Control feels safer than trust. Independence feels stronger than dependence. Self-direction feels more predictable than surrender. But Jesus does not seek to weaken the soul. He seeks to liberate it. Saint Faustina recorded how Jesus desires hearts that are docile, not fragile, but receptive, hearts that do not harden when challenged, hearts that allow his will to interrupt personal plans, preferences, and emotional protections. This is uncomfortable because obedience in the spiritual life is not about rules alone. It is about letting go of self-governance in areas where the soul has learned to survive without God. Many belong to the church faithfully. They attend, they pray, they believe, yet inwardly they remain the final authority over their own hearts. Jesus does not condemn this, but he does not settle for it. He waits for deeper consent. Saint Faustina reveals a Christ who respects freedom so completely that he allows resistance to remain. But he continues to invite, continues to ask, continues to call the soul into a trust that goes beyond comfort. What Jesus expects is not blind obedience. It is relational obedience, the kind that says, "I may not understand, but I trust your heart." The kind that allows him to lead even when the path is unclear. The kind that chooses surrender over self-protection. Many resist this because it feels like loss. In truth, it is exchange. The exchange of fear for trust. The exchange of control for peace. The exchange of self-reliance for divine guidance. Jesus expects this not to burden the soul, but to free it. And until the soul allows this interior obedience, belonging remains incomplete. One of the clearest expectations Jesus reveals to Saint Faustina is this: those who belong to his church are not only to receive mercy, they are to become instruments of mercy. And this is where resistance often becomes strongest. Receiving mercy is comforting. Giving mercy is costly. It is one thing to believe that Jesus is merciful toward you. It is another to allow that mercy to flow through you toward people who have hurt you, disappointed you, or failed you repeatedly. Many accept mercy as a gift, but hesitate to let it reshape how they treat others. Saint Faustina's spirituality makes this unavoidable. Jesus does not separate devotion from compassion. He does not allow the soul to hide behind religious practice while withholding forgiveness, patience, or charity in daily relationships. Belonging to his church means allowing mercy to move from altar to attitude, from prayer to posture, from belief to behavior. This is deeply uncomfortable, because mercy exposes wounds, it confronts resentment, it challenges the instinct to protect oneself. Many resist because mercy feels unsafe. If I forgive, will I be hurt again? If I show patience, will I be taken advantage of? If I remain gentle, will I be seen as weak? These fears are real, and Jesus does not dismiss them. But he does not allow them to govern the heart. Saint Faustina reveals a Christ who expects his followers to trust that mercy is not weakness, it is participation in his own heart. Mercy does not mean ignoring injustice. It does not mean pretending wounds do not exist. It means refusing to let bitterness become a home. Jesus expects those who belong to his church to reflect his mercy not only in words, but in interior posture, how they interpret others, how they speak about others, how they carry offenses. This expectation is resisted because it touches pride. Pride wants to be right. Mercy chooses to be loving. Pride wants recognition of pain. Mercy entrusts pain to God. Pride wants boundaries built on fear. Mercy builds boundaries guided by truth and charity. Saint Faustina shows that Jesus does not force mercy on the soul, he invites it. But he also makes clear that belonging without mercy becomes hollow. Faith without lived compassion becomes disconnected from his heart. Many resist because mercy feels like loss of power. In truth, it is alignment with divine power. To belong to Jesus is to allow his way of loving to replace your own. And his way always leads toward mercy, even when it costs. Jesus expects this not to exhaust the soul, but to conform it to him, and this conformity is not optional for those who truly belong. Another expectation Jesus makes clear to Saint Faustina is one that quietly unsettles many who belong to his church: the call to deep, honest humility, not a surface humility, not polite modesty, but a humility that allows the soul to see itself truthfully, without exaggeration, without self-defense, without illusion. This is where resistance often becomes interior. Many are willing to admit weakness in general terms. Few are willing to face specific areas where pride still governs. Humility is uncomfortable because it removes the ability to manage how we are seen. by others and by ourselves. It strips away the stories we tell to justify behavior, protect ego, or soften responsibility. Saint Faustina reveals a Jesus who does not humiliate the soul, he illuminates it. His goal is not to crush self-worth. It is to free the soul from self-deception. Jesus expects those who belong to his church to live in truth, truth about wounds, truth about motives, truth about limitations, truth about sin, truth about grace. And truth is costly. Because it removes the comfort of excuses, it dismantles spiritual self-image. It confronts the gap between who we are and who we present. Many resist because humility feels like loss of dignity. But Jesus does not equate humility with humiliation. He equates it with clarity. Saint Faustina shows that humility is the doorway to peace. The soul that stops defending itself becomes teachable. The soul that stops pretending becomes reachable. The soul that admits need becomes open to grace. Resistance often comes in subtle forms: spiritual comparison, defensiveness, rationalization, quiet judgment of others to avoid looking inward. These are not signs of malice, they are signs of fear. Fear of being seen, fear of being small, fear of being dependent. But Jesus expects smallness, not as weakness, but as truth. He expects the soul to stop building identity on strength and begin building it on dependence. Not dependence that is anxious, but dependence that is trusting. Saint Faustina reveals a Jesus who delights in souls that admit their poverty, because poverty of spirit creates space for divine action. Pride fills the soul, humility empties it, and only what is empty can be filled. This is why many resist humility. It feels like surrendering control over identity. But in truth, humility is the beginning of real freedom. The soul no longer has to perform. It no longer has to defend. It no longer has to pretend. It can simply be. And this is what Jesus expects from those who belong to his church. Not perfection, but truth. Not image, but honesty. Not strength, but openness. Without this humility, belonging becomes external. With it, belonging becomes transformative. Another expectation Jesus makes clear through Saint Faustina is one that challenges the deepest instinct of the human heart, the call to radical trust. Not partial trust, not situational trust, but a trust that places the future, the wounds, and the unknown fully into his hands. This is where resistance often becomes strongest. Many are willing to trust Jesus with what they cannot handle. Few are willing to trust him with what they think they can control. Self-sufficiency feels responsible, dependence feels risky. Yet Jesus does not ask for trust because he wants to take something from the soul. He asks for trust because he wants to free the soul from the exhausting burden of managing life alone. Saint Faustina reveals a Jesus who speaks repeatedly about abandonment into his will, not as passive resignation, but as active confidence. Confidence that God sees what the soul cannot. Confidence that God works even when the path makes no sense. Many resist because trust feels like vulnerability. If I trust, I lose leverage. If I surrender, I lose certainty. If I abandon myself, I lose control. And control feels safer than faith, but control slowly becomes a prison. The soul that insists on managing outcomes becomes anxious. The soul that insists on understanding everything becomes restless. The soul that insists on protecting itself becomes closed. Jesus expects something different. He expects the soul to allow him to be God. This is not weakness. It is spiritual maturity. Saint Faustina's writings reveal a Christ who desires to carry what the soul insists on carrying alone. He does not condemn self-effort, but he does invite something deeper, cooperation with grace rather than competition with it. Trust is not blind, it is relational. It says, I do not see clearly, but I know who leads me. It says, I release what I cannot fix into your hands. It says, I choose peace over control. Many resist because trust exposes fear, fear of disappointment, fear of loss, fear of surrendering plans that feel necessary for survival. But Jesus does not ask for trust to make the soul reckless. He asks for trust to make it free. Free from carrying what was never meant to be carried alone. Free from anxiety disguised as responsibility. free from self-reliance that slowly replaces reliance on God. Belonging to his church means belonging to a life of trust, not occasional trust, not convenient trust, but daily, quiet, repeated abandonment. This is what many resist, not because they do not believe in God, but because they are used to being their own foundation. Jesus expects something different. He expects to be. If you belong to the Church of Jesus Christ, then belonging is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a deeper surrender. Saint Faustina reveals a Jesus who does not call souls into comfort alone, but into transformation. What he expects is not perfection. It is response to his mercy, response to his truth, response to his call to trust, response to his invitation to be changed. Many resist not because Jesus asks too much, but because he asks for what feels most personal, the will, the heart, the hidden places where control, pride, fear, and self-protection quietly live. Belonging without response becomes routine. Belonging with response becomes relationship. Jesus does not force this response. He waits for it. He invites it. He respects freedom completely. But he does not lower his call. He expects those who belong to his church to allow him to form them, not just to inform them, to shape character, not just belief, to transform interior life, not just external practice. This is why many resist. Transformation is disruptive. Surrender is unsettling. Trust feels risky. Mercy lived out is demanding. Humility feels exposing. Yet this is precisely what belonging means in the heart of Christ. Saint Faustina reveals a Jesus who desires not crowds but hearts, not titles but trust, not external loyalty but interior availability. If you feel resistance in yourself, do not interpret it as failure. Interpret it as invitation. Invitation to deeper belonging, deeper trust, deeper surrender. Jesus does not reject resistant hearts. He calls them. He does not abandon hesitant souls. He waits for them. He does not demand strength first. He asks for willingness. Belonging to his church is not a shield from this call. It is the place where this call becomes unavoidable, and those who respond, slowly, imperfectly, honestly, discover something few expect. That what Jesus asks for is exactly what the soul was created to give, not because it is easy, but because it is true.